Many women spend their entire lives running from silence, believing that the absence of companionship is a sign of neediness or emotional helplessness. However, Carl Jung, the visionary of analytical psychology, warned that there is a stage of development so high that he called it the sovereignty of the soul, the queen stage. This is not a place of sadness, but a sanctuary of silent strength, where the woman ceases to seek external validation to inhabit her own sacred integrity. Most people never reach this level because they fear facing the mirror of their own consciousness without the usual social masks. Entering this stage requires uncommon courage to accept the closure of cycles with old identities that no longer serve a divine purpose. The Queen's secret lies in the discovery that her vitality flows best when she governs her own inner kingdom with authority. The Queen phase begins with a whisper of intuition that warns when the time for being a compulsive caretaker of other people's egos has finally come to an end. Jung explained that the individuation process, the act of becoming who you truly are, requires moments of total retreat from collective noise. It is in this profound solitude that the woman begins to dismantle the scripts of devaluation imposed by toxic experiences or past emotional manipulations. She realizes that true healing does not come from finding a new savior, but from becoming her own unwavering spiritual and emotional guide. The rebirth of the sovereign woman happens in the fertile ground of silence, where she plants seeds of self-respect that no toxic pattern can ever uproot again. This journey of reconstruction is solitary by nature, because no one can walk the path of profound self-discovery for another person or human being. While worldly society classifies female solitude as a flaw, depth psychology recognizes it as the womb of a new and brilliant moral authority. The woman who embraces this phase understands that her vital energy is a sacred resource that must be guarded with loving vigilance against emotionally immature minds. She stops asking permission to inhabit her magnitude and begins to act with the clarity of one who knows that her self-worth is unconditional. This stage demands a radical shift, where the search for approval is replaced by the fullness of being her own psychic center of gravity. The Queen does not fear the desert, for she has learned to find the oasis of her divine essence in the midst of the densest solitude. Each day spent in this phase is an investment in her ultimate sovereignty, transforming what was a burden into a radiant lightness of one who has found herself. Jung warned that the greatest danger to the feminine soul is submission to inferiority complexes that keep it trapped in exhausting and futile relationships. Upon reaching the final stage of her reconstruction, the woman realizes that isolation was the purifying fire necessary to fuse her character with truth. She observes the world with the eyes of one who has already seen through illusions and no longer allows herself to be seduced by empty promises of change from others. Her silent strength communicates an unshakable boundary, establishing a new standard of respect that attracts only what is noble and true to the self. The Queen inhabits a throne built with the stones of past trials, transforming the impact of pain into an authority that heals and protects. This is the awakening of sovereignty, an invitation to look inward and recognize the divinity that has always been there, awaiting her affirmation. This roadmap is a guide for the few women who feel the calling to occupy this throne of heightened consciousness and unwavering peace in their journeys. It is not a journey for the faint of heart, but for those who have decided that spiritual freedom is worth any temporary emotional price. Throughout the following reflections, we will unveil how you can identify if you are crossing the portal to your ultimate and sovereign inner sovereignty. The Queen's solitude is the price of clarity, but it is also the guarantee of a life lived with a purpose that transcends the ego. Prepare to detach yourself from the crumbs of affection and feast on the abundance of your own integrated soul, forgiven by time. The Queen's destiny is to shine with a light that does not blind, but points the way to truth for all who seek life. The second stage of inner sovereignty requires direct confrontation with the mirror of the soul, where all personas and masks of agreeableness must be left on the ground. Carl Jung explained that we wear masks to survive in society, but the conscious queen understands that these masks are the same cracks through which emotional manipulation enters. By deciding to be authentic, the woman cuts off the supply from those who live in the shadows, forcing the truth to appear in all her relationships and dialogues. This spiritual maturity is what allows her to identify the lack of empathy in others, even before disrespect manifests itself in actions. Concrete. Before I forget, I invite you to subscribe to the channel now to strengthen your awakening. To inhabit the naked truth about oneself is the most powerful act of self-respect a woman can perform after traversing deserts of toxic experiences. In the queen phase, she stops apologizing for her intensity, her intelligence, or her need to establish non-negotiable boundaries in her daily life. She understands that silencing her sacred feminine was the weapon the toxic pattern used to keep her small and dependent on validation. The reconstruction of her self-image no longer depends on the gaze of others, but on the clarity of her own full consciousness, integrated with the self. She now observes attempts at gaslighting with wise indifference because her inner compass is calibrated to the firm rock of reality. The fall of the masks reveals a beauty that time cannot erase, for it is nourished by the eternal source of her own integrity. The queen learns that conscious vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness, allowing her to connect with the sacred without fear of worldly judgment. She uses her silent strength to protect her inner garden, ensuring that only seeds of reciprocity and truth are planted in its fertile soil. Jung teaches us that true healing happens when we stop hiding our wounds and begin to use them as portals to our higher spiritual maturity. Rebuilding peace requires you to be your own guardian, refusing to participate in others' dramas that seek only to consume your divine brilliance. By occupying your throne, you signal to the universe that the time of being manipulated has come to its definitive and sacred end. You become unreachable by the shadows, for you inhabit a level of consciousness where lies no longer find fertile ground to germinate. Often, social pressure will try to convince the queen that she must revert to being the nice girl who accepts crumbs to maintain artificial harmony. However, awakening to inner sovereignty brings the wisdom that harmony without self-respect is merely a prison disguised as external peace. Reconstructing her life's trajectory requires her to walk with the dignity of someone who has fully forgiven herself and owes nothing to the judgment of others. She understands that closing cycles with mediocrity opens doors to connections that truly honor her greatness. Her solitude is filled by a divine presence, a constant conversation with the self that replenishes her courage for each new turn. The queen needs no external armies, for her authority emanates from the perfect union between her mind and her healed, unwavering heart. The definitive turning point occurs when the woman realizes that the disrespect of the past was the harsh teacher who taught her never again to neglect her own light. She is grateful for the bitter lessons, but takes from them only the pearl of wisdom, leaving the ashes behind on the path to her total liberation. The queen phase is the recognition that you are the sole owner of your vitality and the sovereign architect of your own emotional happiness. Maturation has brought the realization that life is too short to be spent in labyrinths of mental confusion created by immature minds. The queen now walks under the sun of truth, radiating a security that calms the righteous and repels those who seek only control. Her story of overcoming is the manifesto of her victory, a hymn to the resilience of a soul that dared to awaken. The transmutation of isolation into solitude is the supreme alchemical process that Jung described as the conquest of profound feminine spiritual autonomy. While common loneliness is marked by the pain of absence, the Queen's solitude is celebrated by the fullness of self-presence in total harmony. It is in this inner laboratory that the spiritualized woman fuses her fragmented pieces to create a diamond-like identity, unbreakable in the face of psychological pressures. She discovers that silence is not a vacuum, but an ocean of possibilities where the answers for her reconstruction emerge with absolute clarity. Maturation at this stage allows her to use her vitality to nurture her own dreams and not to feed the delusions of grandeur of others. The gold of consciousness shines when the desire to be loved by another is surpassed by the glory of being loved by one's own soul. The Queen understands that solitude is the protective shield that prevents the toxic projections of the collective unconscious from penetrating her sacred vibrational field. She uses this time of retreat to cleanse the memories of devaluation that have become ingrained in her emotional cells during the period of pressure. Jung explained that the soul renews itself through contact with the sacred, and solitude is the temple where this divine and restorative encounter takes place. The reconstruction of dignity requires her to learn to inhabit her own company, with the same pleasure she previously sought in arid and ungrateful sources. By establishing this unwavering boundary with the world, she signals that her peace is her most precious and non-negotiable asset under any circumstances. The epic rebirth occurs when she realizes that true authority resides in the silence of those who have nothing left to prove to anyone. In this stage of awakening, the sacred feminine emanates a silent force that destabilizes any attempt at manipulation or control by immature minds. The Queen observes the tactics of guilt-inducing behavior with a distant curiosity, recognizing in them the mark of those who still inhabit spiritual and egocentric infancy. She does not engage in the game of justifications, for her truth is sovereign and does not need the approval of those who only see the illusory surface of things. The reconstruction of her joy is an internal work, a garden she cultivates with self-respect and with the wisdom gleaned from the desert of overcoming. She understands that isolation was the gift the universe gave her, so that she could discover her immeasurable immensity and her eternal light. Liberation is the state of one who has discovered that the treasure of life is kept within her own heart, protected by an innate clarity. Many women fear silence because they hear the echo of their own insecurities in it, but the Queen has transformed that echo into a melody of conscious awakening. She uses solitude to calibrate her intuition, making it a high-precision radar that identifies the shadow of others long before the first emotional impact. Spiritual maturity allows her to navigate turbulent seas with the serenity of one who possesses the map of her own psychic and emotional territory. The reconstruction of strength lies in the perception that solitude is the source of eternal youth for the soul that has refused to wither. She inhabits her final phase with the elegance of one who knows that the closing of a cycle was the necessary birth for her new and radiant identity. The Queen walks in the world, but her home is the majestic silence of her own full consciousness, integrated with the divine. The Queen's gold is wisdom that cannot be bought, for it was conquered through the honest confrontation of each phase of her deep and silenced pain. She radiates a security that attracts only what is noble, functioning as a natural filter that repels the mediocrity of systematic manipulation. The reconstruction ended with the certainty that she is complete and that any future partnership should be an addition to her fullness, never a necessity. She celebrates her epic rebirth every day, treating herself with the reverence that her maturity and courage justly demand. The Queen in Solitude is living proof that the human soul is invincible when it decides to walk under the light of its own sovereign truth. This is Jung's secret. Solitude is the throne where consciousness crowns itself and governs destiny with self-love. The turning point in a woman's life when she achieves sovereignty is the moment she decides she will never again accept crumbs of affection. Carl Jung observed that many feminine souls remain trapped in cycles of excessive giving for fear of being seen as selfish or cold by worldly social pressures. The Queen, however, understands that true love flows from inner abundance, not from the neediness that seeks to fill deep existential voids. She definitively ends the cycle of emotional begging, recognizing that her time and attention are sacred treasures that should only be shared with those who inhabit reciprocity. The reconstruction of her self-esteem reaches its peak when she realizes that her own company is the richest banquet she has ever had the privilege of attending. The awakening of this consciousness is what makes her unreachable for emotional predators who seek only to feed immature minds. The Queen inhabits her throne with the firmness of one who has already faced the desert of devaluation and learned to create her own water of life and spirit. She stops seeking validation in the eyes of those who lack the capacity to see her divine light and begins to seek the approval of her own self. Jung explained that individuation requires us to relinquish the power we have given to others over our feelings and over our unconditional and radiant peace. The reconstruction of psychic integrity involves this strategic withdrawal of energy that was previously wasted trying to save those who do not wish to be healed. She now uses her silent strength to build her own destiny, acting with an authority born from the integration of her past shadows. The closing of the cycle with the toxic pattern is celebrated as a hymn of liberation, marking the beginning of an era of spiritual and mental prosperity. Reclaiming the reins of her life requires the sovereign woman to establish boundaries of self-respect that are impenetrable to systematic lies and aggressive manipulation. She has learned that saying no is an act of worship to her own divinity, and that her vitality must be protected with constant loving vigilance. Spiritual maturity has brought the clarity that disrespect from others is a limitation of the one who practices it, and not a reflection of their inadequacy or human failing. The reconstruction of her powerful aura is felt by all around her, for she emanates a dignity that demands a new level of conscious human interaction. She no longer engages in childish competitions for attention, for she inhabits a level of consciousness where her magnitude is obvious and her peace is non-negotiable. The Queen walks with the elegance of one who has already won the war against emotional dependence and occupied her rightful place in life. Inner sovereignty manifests itself in the ability to make decisions based on unwavering values, not on impulses caused by external psychological pressure from the collective environment. The Queen uses her intuition as a faithful advisor, consulting her inner oracle before allowing any new energy to enter her sacred space of coexistence. She understands that awakening requires a radical commitment to truth, even if that truth temporarily distances her from immature and toxic social circles. The reconstruction of her faith in life is solid, for she has discovered that the universe conspires in favor of those who have the courage to honor themselves unconditionally. She observes the fluctuations of the world with a serenity that disconcerts those who live in emotional chaos and a profound lack of existential meaning. Her throne is her center, and from it she emanates a peace that transforms pain into wisdom and solitude into true power. At the end of this journey of reconstruction, the woman realizes that the isolation of the past was the necessary training for her to masterfully inhabit her authority. She celebrates her epic rebirth, recognizing in each mark of overcoming the seal of her glory and her full and radiant spiritual maturity over time. Jung's revealed secret about female solitude is the discovery that you are your greatest ally, and that your wholeness does not depend on any external mirror. The Queen no longer seeks someone to complete her, for she has discovered that the self is the absolute whole that sustains her existence with divine and sovereign light. Her life is now a hymn of freedom, a masterpiece of transformation that inspires the awakening of other souls seeking true healing. Follow the guidance of your silent strength, for you were born to reign over your own heart in total and unwavering peace. Intuition is the Queen's sacred radar, the infallible compass that Carl Jung identified as the direct communication channel between the conscious and the divine. At the stage of sovereignty, a woman ceases to ignore the subtle signals that her body and soul send in the face of boundary incursions or manipulative minds. She has learned to validate that butterflies in her stomach or silent discomfort as truths that worldly intellect often tries to justify in the name of social harmony. Spiritual maturity requires you to stop seeking external proof for what your conscience has already perceived as a lack of integrity or a pattern of control. Rebuilding your inner confidence is what sustains your throne, allowing you to navigate turbulent seas with the serenity of one who knows the horizon. The awakening of intuition is the seal that the Queen has recovered her power of discernment and her clarity about all things on the journey. Jung explained that the self speaks to us through premonitions and inner visions that protect our vitality from the wear and tear caused by emotionally immature and manipulative people. In the final stage of reconstruction, the spiritual woman uses this oracle to filter out those who possess the necessary maturity to frequent the sacred ground of her intimate life. She understands that her energy is a limited resource, and that the disrespect of others is a frequency that can no longer peacefully inhabit the radio of her perception. The reconstruction of her soul involves this loving vigilance, where she honors the silent voice that calls her to absolute and non-negotiable self-respect every day. She no longer needs lengthy explanations, as her intuition has already given her the verdict on the toxicity of the environment even before the conversation begins. This intuitive authority is the armor of light that protects her brilliance against the systematic and cold attempts at silencing by evil. The Queen in Solitude dedicates time to nurturing this channel of communication, understanding that the noise of the world is the greatest enemy of her spiritual and emotional clarity. She practices non-reactive observation, allowing the wisdom of her unconscious to emerge and reveal the maps of her next positive and vibrant transformations. Spiritual maturity brings the courage to follow intuition, even when it points to paths of cycle closure that seem frightening on the logical surface. The reconstruction of her trajectory is guided by a voice that does not shout, but resonates with the firmness of 1,000 generations of ancestors who knew how to preserve life. She inhabits herself with the tranquility of one who knows she is never helpless, for the inner guide is an inseparable extension of her own sovereign divinity. Liberation occurs the moment you decide that your inner knowing is superior to any distorted external narrative of control. Often, the betrayal of one's own intuition in the past is what allowed the impact of pain, and the Queen forgives this past version to rebuild her strength now. She uses the memory of the toxic pattern as a guide to what not to allow, strengthening her determination to never again ignore the warnings of her sacred soul. The awakening to sovereign intuition is the end of gaslighting, for the sovereign woman no longer allows anyone to reshape her reality or her memory with subtle lies. The reconstruction of her integrity is complete when her inner vision becomes so clear that she sees the shadow of others through the most well-constructed masks of society. She walks in the world with the dignity of one who possesses the oracle in her heart, radiating a confidence that disarms manipulative minds at first visual and spiritual contact. Her silent strength is now felt as a command of natural respect, emanating from her union with unwavering divine truth. At the end of this awakening stage, the Queen realizes that her intuition is the greatest gift she has received to guarantee her spiritual freedom and unconditional peace. The reconstruction ended with the certainty that you possess within yourself all the necessary answers to flourish with authority and complete clarity before the universe. Spiritual maturity has given you the eyes of the phoenix, which see through the ashes of the past and point to the bright sun of a conscious tomorrow. You look to your inner oracle with gratitude, knowing that it is the bridge to your wholeness and to the true success of your healing mission. Follow the guidance of your sacred voice, for it is the guarantee that your sovereignty will never again be stolen by the shadows of emotionally immature minds. You are free, you are queen, and your intuition is the eternal light that governs your sacred kingdom with absolute wisdom. The sacred feminine resides in the womb of creation, a center of vital energy that Jung associated with psychic libido and the capacity to generate new realities of full life. For the Queen who has achieved her sovereignty, this center ceases to be a receptacle for the pain of others and becomes the source of her own awakening and radiant emotional reconstruction. She understood that the toxic patterns sought to drain this vitality, to feed the emptiness of a hungry and immature ego, leaving her exhausted and without spiritual brilliance. The reconstruction of the soul requires her to gather her energy from all past battlefields, bringing it back to nourish her own talents and her unconditional peace. Spiritual maturity occurs when the pleasure of creating and shining surpasses the habit of sacrificing oneself for those who do not know how to honor life or gratitude. The Queen is reborn when her womb begins to pulsate again to the rhythm of her own sovereign and unwavering truth. The recovery of vital energy requires closing the cycle with every unnecessary worry about the life of someone who has chosen to inhabit the shadow of systematic lies. The Queen uses her silent strength to focus on what builds her new identity, ignoring the attempts at emotional suction that seek to pull her back into the labyrinth of suffering. Jung explained that energy follows focus, and by removing her gaze from the impact suffered, the woman allows her vitality to work miracles in her own internal reconstruction. She discovers that her creativity is a shield against the lack of worldly empathy, transforming the rubble of the past into jewels of wisdom and intense positive transformations. Spiritual maturity brings the lightness of one who has released burdens that did not belong to her, now inhabiting a body that vibrates with the clarity of the integrated and healed self. Her life is now fertile ground, where only seeds of divine light have the sacred right to germinate and grow. Embracing her creative power means that the sovereign woman no longer apologizes for her magnitude or her spiritual and human success before a passive society. She understands that her brilliance is an offering of healing to the world, but that its protection is a sacred duty to the universal creator of consciousness. The reconstruction of psychic integrity involves celebrating each small victory over the inertia and fear that the toxic pattern tried to implant in her mind. She now governs her time with the firmness of one who knows that every minute of vitality is a grain of gold that must be invested in her awakening. Maturation has brought the perception that joy is a political act of freedom against any system that seeks to silence and devalue the sacred feminine. The Queen shines from within, radiating a confidence that attracts only what is authentic and naturally repels what is mediocre and cold. In Jungian psychology, the mystical union between her sensitivity and her power of action is what generates the epic rebirth of the woman in the sovereign queen phase. She no longer fragments herself to fit into exhausting relationships, for she knows that her totality is non-negotiable and sacred in every sense of the word awakening. The reconstruction culminated in the formation of a diamond-like consciousness, unshakable in the face of the opinions of emotionally immature minds that inhabit the surface of empty social life. She celebrates her inner phoenix, recognizing that the fire of narcissistic betrayal was what purified her womb so that the gold of wisdom could finally emerge sovereign. The queen walks with the calm of one who knows that the source of life resides within her, inexhaustible and independent of external and transient validations. Her recovered vitality is the seal of her spiritual victory, the announcement of a new time where she is the sole owner of her destiny of divine light. Upon completing this chapter of energetic rescue, the woman realizes that her strength doesn't need to be shouted to be clearly felt throughout the universe around her. The reconstruction has ended in the fullness of a being who has forgiven herself and now loves herself with a depth that the disrespect of others can no longer reach. Spiritual maturity is the crowning of her inner phoenix, which has risen from the ashes of devaluation to inhabit the heaven of absolute freedom and full eternal consciousness. Jung's secret is the discovery that you are the guardian of your own flame and that your awakening is the greatest glory the soul can inhabit. Continue shining with all the intensity of your sacred feminine. Honor your rebirth and live with the dignity of one who has discovered that the light is unbreakable. You are free, you are sovereign, and your womb is now the altar of a peace that nothing can disturb or extinguish before divine truth. The clearest sign that a woman has occupied the queen's throne is the development of a wise indifference towards those who once tried to cruelly manipulate her. Jung observed that hatred is still a strong emotional bond, a chain that binds the soul to the shadow of the aggressor, but indifference is the definitive severing of this traumatic tie. The queen no longer expends her vitality hating or trying to understand emotionally immature minds. She simply removes them from her psychic narrative with clarity and moral authority. This spiritual maturity allows her to observe hoovering tactics or future devaluation, as if watching a repeated film with no real interest. The reconstruction ends in the fullness of a heart that has become unreachable by the attacks of those who inhabit the desert of chronic and empty lack of empathy. The queen governs through the silence of her emotional absence, communicating that the territory of her soul is now permanently closed to evil. Wise indifference starves the toxic pattern to death, because without the conscious victim's reaction, the manipulator loses the mirror in which they projected their false grandeur and fictitious power. The queen understands that her attention is her most valuable resource and decides to invest it only in her own healing process and lasting positive transformations. She observes the other's unstable behavior with an almost clinical detachment, recognizing in it the fragility of an ego that never had the courage to mature before the self. The reconstruction of peace requires that you release the need for external justice and assume the internal justice of unconditionally honoring yourself every day of your journey. Jung teaches us that true liberation occurs when we cease to be psychic hostages to the opinions of those who lack innate spiritual or moral integrity. The queen walks in the light of her own consciousness, ignoring the noise of minds that seek only chaos to avoid facing the inner void. This emotional sovereignty allows a woman to close cycles with an elegance that disconcerts those who expected screams, tears, or vain attempts at reparation and empty justifications. Rebuilding integrity requires discarding emotional manipulation as if it were an old object, no longer useful for your radiant and profound new awakening. Spiritual maturity has brought the wisdom that time is sacred and that disrespect from others is a deviation from the path that should not be tolerated for even a second. By inhabiting her throne, the Queen signals to the universe that she is immune to tactics that induce doubt and that her clarity is non-negotiable in the face of any worldly social pressure. She no longer seeks to understand the manipulator, for she has realized that his shadow is an abyss that she is not meant to illuminate with her own vital and precious light. Peace is the result of a mind that has stopped debating with lies and has chosen to permanently inhabit the truth of its sacred self. Jung explained that integrating the shadow makes us aware of the malice of others without becoming part of it, allowing for a strategic and calm discarding of external toxicity. The Queen uses this clarity to cleanse her circle of affection, maintaining only connections that vibrate at the frequency of reciprocity and integral, resilient self-respect over time. The reconstruction ended with the certainty that you are the only authority capable of defining who enters and who remains in the sacred garden of your vibrant and profound existence. Spiritual maturity gives you the security to walk alone if necessary, knowing that the Queen's solitude is infinitely superior to the company of systematic emotional devaluation. Your silent strength now emanates from a place of protective indifference, a crystal armor that reflects the other's intentions back to them without shaking your divine inner peace. The ultimate liberation is the realization that the manipulator has lost access to your world because you simply stopped considering them relevant to your light. At the end of this awakening phase, the woman realizes that Jung's secret to sovereignty lies in the complete withdrawal of emotional investment from barren and ungrateful terrains conducive to growth. The reconstruction culminates in the formation of a self-sufficient soul, one that forgives itself and inhabits the present moment with the majesty of one who has already won the greatest of all wars. Spiritual maturity is the crowning of the phoenix, which has risen from the ashes of manipulation to shine in a sky of absolute freedom and full awareness of human destiny. You now look to the future with the serenity of one who possesses the compass of truth in their heart, ensuring that their path is written with the inks of divine dignity. Your life is now a hymn of self-respect, an unwavering testament that the human soul is invincible when it decides to definitively occupy its throne of inner sovereignty. The Queen inhabits the eternal peace of the soul that has found itself, free from all chains of neediness and aggressive lies from others. The sovereign Queen reaches the pinnacle of her psychic integration when she manages to unite, as Jung described, the cunning necessary to discern evil and the gentleness to inhabit the light. She possesses the wisdom of the serpent to identify hidden plots, inversions of blame, and whispers of devaluation long before they attempt to approach her heart. Nothing escapes her gaze, calibrated by the fire of experience, allowing her to perform strategic protective maneuvers with a precision that emotionally immature minds will never be able to decipher clearly. At the same time, she maintains the meekness of the dove, an aura of profound peace that communicates to the world that her strength does not need shouts or aggression to be respected. This paradoxical balance is the mark of the Queen that Jung warned is rare, for it demands the perfect synthesis between awareness of the shadow and fidelity to the sacred and unwavering self. To inhabit this union of opposites allows a woman to walk through valleys of worldly and professional shadows without the toxicity of others being able to penetrate her field of spiritual and emotional clarity. She uses her silent strength to disarm chaos, acting with a firmness that commands natural respect in all her dialogues and effective encounters on her conscious journey. Maturation has brought the wisdom that being good does not mean being naive, and that non-negotiable self-respect is the only guarantee that her vitality will be preserved for her divine mission. The reconstruction of psychic integrity ends in the realization that you can be gentle with the pure and unreachable to manipulators through a strategy of wise and firm silence. She no longer seeks to save toxic minds, for she understands that her first loyalty is to the light that dwells within her, and that it requires a soil of absolute reciprocity to flourish. Her peace is now a silken armor, flexible enough to flow with life, but resistant enough to block systematic lies. In this stage of sovereign awakening, the Queen observes the theaters of lack of empathy with an almost poetic detachment, recognizing in them the futile repetition of those who refuse to practice maturation. She has detached herself from the need to convert darkness into light in others, focusing all her energy on expanding her own unconditional and radiant brilliance before all beings. The reconstruction culminated in the formation of a consciousness that knows exactly where to place its feet, avoiding the traps of emotional neediness that previously bound it to the labyrinth of aggressive control. Jung teaches us that psychic wholeness is the prize of those who dared to look at their own shadow and found in it the gold of moral authority and inner sovereignty. The Queen inhabits her final phase with the dignity of one who has overcome the eclipse, transforming the impact suffered in the past into a prophetic wisdom that now guides each victorious step. Her authority emanates from radical integrity with herself, a seal of awakening that time and pain cannot erase or diminish. Often the Queen in solitude is perceived as a mystery by those who still inhabit the surface of relationships, for she does not dedicate her energy to superficial or draining interactions without reciprocity. She has become divine selectivity personified, acting as a filter of clarity that attracts what is noble and naturally repels what seeks only domination and the vital exploitation of others. The reconstruction of the feminine soul achieves success when the woman realizes that her wise silence is the most powerful answer to the emotional and mental immaturity of egocentric minds. She does not waste words on those who have no ears for the truth, reserving her sacred speech for dialogues that promote mutual flourishing and non-negotiable peace in the face of life. Her posture is a hymn of freedom, a testament to the fact that the inner phoenix has risen wiser, stronger, and infinitely more protected against cruel worldly and social illusions. Spiritual maturity is the final coronation of this queen who has learned that her value is eternal and her compass is divine. The sovereign queen now shines with the light of transmutation, she who transformed the poison of manipulation into the antidote of full consciousness, integrated with the sacred and divine self. She walks the world with the gentleness of one who knows who she is, and with the wisdom of one who has seen the shadows and has not allowed herself to be swallowed by the lack of profound existential meaning. The reconstruction culminated in the celebration of a full life, where unconditional peace is the melody that guides each new dawn of freedom conquered with courage and clarity. Jung would be at peace, contemplating a soul that faced the abyss and brought back the pearl of integrity to occupy its throne of definitive and radiant inner sovereignty. You are now the guardian of your own flame, ensuring that your awakening is eternal, and your sovereignty is protected by the justice of the soul that forgave itself and rebuilt itself with glory. Continue to inhabit your magnitude, honor your maturity, and shine forever in the truth of being queen of yourself before the entire universe. The final stage of the Queen's journey is the recognition that her victory was not in winning an argument with the shadow, but in becoming unreachable by the vibrational frequency of evil and manipulation. Carl Jung described this moment as the triumph of the self over the forces of unconscious chaos, where the woman ceases to be a victim and becomes the master of her own spiritual path. She realizes that all the challenges of reconstruction, Each impact of the pain suffered, and each necessary cycle closure served to sculpt the queen who now inhabits the throne of absolute clarity. The victory of the soul manifests in the tranquility of one who no longer fears solitude, for she has discovered that her own company is a divine banquet of peace and integral, resilient self-respect. Her legacy is a light that does not blind, but illuminates the path for other feminine souls seeking a way out of the labyrinth of chronic emotional devaluation. Living in sovereignty means that the manipulator and the toxic pattern have completely lost access to the control panel of their emotions and their radiant happiness before the world. The queen observes the past with the wise distance of one who reads an ancient book whose lessons have already been fully absorbed and integrated into their ancient and profound wisdom. The reconstruction ended with the certainty that her vitality is sacred, and that her presence is a privilege reserved only for those who resonate with the non-negotiable truth of a healed heart. Spiritual maturity brought the clarity that self-respect is the only law that governs her kingdom, establishing a new level of dignity that naturally repels immature and manipulative minds. She now radiates a security that calms environments, communicating a moral authority that disintegrates systematic lies with the simple, silent force of her sovereign integrity. Awakening is now her permanent skin, an armor of glory that protects her divine essence forever. The sovereign queen understands that her journey of overcoming challenges is the seed of a new culture of consciousness, where the sacred feminine is honored in its unwavering and non-negotiable totality before society. She holds no grudges, for she has transmuted resentment into a healing power that emanates from her serene gaze and her wise and firm silence against emotional disrespect. The reconstruction of the feminine soul achieves total success when the success of others' maturation ceases to be her responsibility, allowing her to focus only on her own continuous and brilliant blossoming. Jung teaches us that individuation is the destiny of those who dared to confront the shadow and found the unwavering sun of their own integrated and awakened inner divinity. Ultimate liberation is the perception that the unconditional peace you inhabit is the fruit of your courage to forgive yourself and rebuild yourself in the clear waters of radical honesty with yourself. Your story is the unforgettable testament that light always triumphs over shadows in the heart of those who choose to shine with sovereignty. In this final stage, the Queen celebrates her epic rebirth every day, treating her life as a sanctuary of consciousness that no longer accepts fragments of being or crumbs of illusory and fleeting affection. She inhabits her maturation with the lightness of one who has released the anchors of the past and decided to navigate only in waters of clarity, transformation, and unconditional peace before divine time. The reconstruction culminated in the formation of a diamond-like consciousness, unshakable in the face of worldly pressures and fully attuned to the higher purposes of her full and conscious existence before all. She now looks to the horizon with the enthusiasm of one who knows that the best of life is to inhabit one's own truth with absolute sovereignty and with sacred and potent moral authority. Her silent strength is the beacon that guides her destiny, ensuring that her tomorrow is written with the inks of freedom, purpose, and the eternal glory of her integrated soul. Continue being a queen, honor your journey, and shine forever in the light of your awakening. The victory of sovereign consciousness is the definitive end of all patterns of control that once sought to silence your emotions and create an aggressive and toxic mental imbalance in the face of worldly life. The Queen now reigns on a throne of self-respect, governing her life with the justice of the phoenix that has learned the ultimate secret of the psychic and spiritual immortality of her sacred essence. The reconstruction has ended in the fullness of a self-sufficient being who honors herself and who inhabits the present moment with the majesty of one who has discovered that the gold of life was integrated within her. Awakening is the point of no return towards the eternity of an unconditional peace that no one can again take from her healed and awakened heart. Jung would smile to see the glory of one who faced the eclipse and emerged as the sun of her own psychic system, unshakable, radiant, and infinitely sovereign before human and spiritual destiny. Her inheritance is light, her throne is truth, and her journey is the eternal victory of the soul over the shadows of lies. The final stage of this awakening is the full assumption of the eternal throne, where the Queen Woman governs her own psyche with the unwavering authority of one who has masterfully integrated light and shadow with spiritual expertise. Jung warned that few women reach this final stage because it demands absolute detachment from all emotional dependencies and a radical commitment to regenerative and sacred solitude. Inner sovereignty is no longer a goal to be achieved, but the firm ground beneath her feet, the rock of self-respect, where her full life now flourishes with clarity and divine moral authority. The reconstruction culminates in the realization that the unconditional peace you inhabit is your greatest wealth and your ultimate protection against the onslaughts of emotionally immature and egocentric minds. I invite you to subscribe to the channel now to celebrate your new sovereign journey. To inhabit this eternal throne means that the Queen is now the sole and absolute guardian of her own vitality, deciding with unwavering wisdom who deserves the privilege of her radiant and conscious presence. The reconstruction of the feminine soul has reached its peak, transforming the scars of the traumatic past into jewels of wisdom that now adorn her new sovereign and unwavering identity before time. Maturation has brought the realization that the Queen's solitude is the supreme state of grace for one who has forgiven herself and freed herself from all chains of aggressive and dishonest emotional manipulation. Jung taught us that the goal of life is to become who we are, and occupying this throne is the physical and spiritual evidence that you have fulfilled your mission of awakening with glory and total integrity. Your silent strength now emanates from an inexhaustible source, ensuring that your light shines forever in the sky of your own full consciousness, integrated with the sacred divine self. The Queen's victory manifests in the tranquility of one who no longer needs to fight against the shadows, for her mere integrity disintegrates them upon the first visual or vibrational contact with the world.